We're out on the Recruiting Roadshow brought to you by Greenhouse, where we're talking with talent acquisition leaders and recruiting operations professionals about the problems keeping us up at night. We're out in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm about to sit down with Laurie David. Laurie's a talent acquisition leader committed to operations, systems, and mentorship in the recruiting industry. One of the things I appreciate about Laurie is her ability to connect with the community, which is more important than ever as we face a future in recruiting with AI. What is missing in the recruiting industry right now?
I think that as I've had these conversations with recruiters and then in my own experience, I know that they're under a lot of pressure right now. I feel it, right? The stress of the market is saturated with a lot of applicants. And I think clearly that has something to do with AI. And there's just no other time that I've seen where it's so easy to just click a button and have applicants go out. So I think that they're under too much pressure, time sensitive. And so what's happening is they're rushing the process. And I don't know that they really have the true understanding of what the role entails, what the end result is going to be. And then I worry that they're only relying on, okay, you fit the keyword search, so therefore I'm just going to ask these kind of generic questions that aren't really getting to what truly is the challenge that you're facing. And so I've asked that question to a recruiter, what is not on the job description that I can't see? What is really going on? So I think that pressure for recruiters, they're overwhelmed, and I'm feeling the burnout for them. I know they're burned out.
When it comes to executive hiring, how do you think recruiters can do a better job of understanding the outcomes and that nuance and what you just said, what's not on the job description?
The brief is so important. What is the end result? And I think that's where recruiters are missing that consultative piece because they're so focused on trying to get the role right with the buzzwords or whatever they want to bring forward. What if there's M&A activity happening? Do they understand how to ask those questions? We want to be able to protect revenue in the role that we're doing. I'm not sure that the business acumen is fully there. And I think that comes with a level of curiosity. Think back to my own recruiting days and the full life cycle and the speed in which you had to do it, but the quality that needed to be there. I needed to ask questions. I'm not a full stack engineer. I'm not the CFO, but I need to know what is driving this. And I think the pieces that you would ask normally, what backgrounds, what other companies, certainly what company you're doing this for, what are they looking for? And I think that a lot of that has to do with also potential. What if there's somebody below the mark that may have the right skills, but what is their potential?
You raise a good point, and it's, do we have enough time for curiosity? Do we give recruiters enough space to ask those questions when we think about their workload, capacity planning for a team? What is the hiring manager's level of experience? How does the hiring manager make time as a partnership for the hire so that those briefs, those intakes, those kickoffs, those check-ins can be most beneficial and truly consultative? So now recruiters, perhaps in their role, they're feeling the pressure of, I need to do a great job. I need to deliver this hire so that I can keep my job. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is even top recruiters are experiencing those position eliminations in certain companies. Then you couple things like increased application volume, the issues we're seeing around candidate fraud and identity verification. How do recruiters have time to have that curiosity?
Well, I think if I look back at the foundational, right, you think about recruiting as an art and a science, right? And I find that this has a lot to do with leadership and how that understanding of what a recruiter would go through. But because there are so many applicants, it's noise, right? So they're getting distracted. The second piece is we can use, and I embrace AI to help us triage some of that can be triaged. But the second piece is if you are slowing down, because you think about ramp up, I've been through so many super growth moments, whether that's for a department or a whole company. And I think what stands out to me is I've learned that you got to slow down in order to go fast. And I think those things, and there's all these indicators that you can see where quality, but we know that speed can kill. And if you have clear delineation of who's actually in charge, setting up time with those managers to say, what is the cadence we need to do check-ins, and the funnel. I need to understand if the quality of candidates, if they're not moving through the funnel, those are indicators, right, that there's friction in the process.
Getting signal through noise is
Mm.
such a common theme I'm hearing today from recruiters. They're trying to understand conversion rates in the funnel and yield ratios. They're combining outbound strategies with increased volume of unqualified inbound
Yeah.
candidates. What are the data points that you're looking to understand recruiter efficacy?
I mean, when you think about it, just because someone is having several phone calls in a day or several submittals, that doesn't mean you're actually hitting quality. So that funnel is so important. I would actually rather have 3 great candidates and 2 get through the process. But that takes some time because you don't know who's actually looking at the resumes. Maybe they need some education too, and a partnership. That's why it's so important. I'll give you an example. Recruiters who come to me and say, I've submitted all these candidates and I'm not understanding why we're not able to actually get to an interview. I mean, I think I'm having great screens, but then you look at the job description and you're thinking, this is like 3 jobs in one. So, how do we have a conversation with the hiring manager to say, is there an option that we can take to say, do you think these are 2 different roles? Do you think we should look in another place? And I think having that point to stop and actually ask questions, that's why it's important to have these touch points to say, where's the friction? Something's happening in this process that's not actually allowing us to move forward. So again, volume doesn't mean it's successful. I think that the quality and how we're actually rating that, I think a lot of companies today are still having trouble with what does good look like. And I think that's a big piece to figuring that out.
When I think about recruiters being some of the most resilient people I know, in your experience as a leader, what are some of those common themes or roadblocks you see recruiters come to you with when they're looking to uplevel their own career?
Well, when I think of some of the individual development plans that I've worked on, right, with my recruiters, I'm always asking them to help me understand where are those roadblocks for them. I mean, it could be as simple as I can't get through all of these candidates, so I'm, talking about blocking time. Where does that make sense to block time so that you're prepared for the day? So half of it could be just an organization challenge. The other piece is how do we look through a resume and understand what is between the lines? Because I think that there's been these statistics that have been put out there that recruiters are only looking at a resume for 7 to 8 seconds, which is concerning to me because part of the art of recruitment is understanding what do I see in this person's background, not just the keywords, not just the skills, but what they were doing at their former company, their current company, that's actually going to fit with what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that's again the business acumen and understanding how do I be a consultative recruiter to ask questions. You have to be naturally curious and it's okay to ask. And I think maybe there's this idea that managers don't want to have that conversation. But in my experience, they actually do. They want someone to come and say, wait, I have a question about, why this particular skill or this profile didn't work for you. And of course, there's all sorts of data we can go through of where are some of the companies that people have been successful, right? So when you're ranking, quality of hire or what's the quality of someone ramp up time when they're actually driving revenue? Those are the questions that I would be asking to say, now we can take this profile and say, let's replicate this, but still have the ability to ask questions to glean the story. I used to also ask my recruiters, they would try to put, 3 or 4 bullets as to why they think this candidate, right? So they would be thinking, not just submit the candidate and say, okay, what do you think? Waiting for the hiring managers to make the decision. And sometimes they would just put, 5 to 7 years of experience. They were just reiterating their resume. I'm like, they don't need that. They want to understand what conversation did you have in those 30 minutes, hopefully at least, that they are gleaning why they would be a fit. And I think some managers even would love a recruiter to say, I know this doesn't look like the normal profile that we've looked at, but I had this conversation and these are the things that I gleaned. I think you should talk to them. I mean, that's confidence, right?
Absolutely. I think recruiter confidence is key when it comes to earning a seat at the table, getting that trust and buy in from a hiring manager,
Yeah.
particularly when a recruiter is working with a VP level hiring manager. That VP may also be working with agency partners, and we both know how agencies operate.
Yes.
And we need to have that level of consultative approach and communication. And you mentioned such a great point of providing a little bit of context and storytelling around a candidate. When I zoom out and look at great hiring processes in general, so much of what we do is storytelling with data. How do you think about reporting on the right stories to your leadership team and your hiring managers?
Well, if you're asking right from the data perspective, right, because you can slice data so many different ways. And I think that, we're looking at patterns, right? We're also looking at times when they can be true indicators of what is not working, but they're not all perfect, right? Because, cost is definitely there. So I'm looking at cost per hire. But if you're talking about quality, I'm looking at first year turnover. I'm looking at what those reasons are. And it could indicate many things. Maybe it's the leadership, it could be the interview process. Who did the interview? I mean, those are deeper, but I, really want to understand how can we measure something that's going to impact the business versus volume of phone calls or look, time to fill, always a good one as an indicator because there could be a challenge there, not necessarily the TA is doing something wrong or the hiring manager is doing something wrong, but you can get indicators. There's too many variables. But even though I'm collecting that information, it's not what I would lead with, right? There's a lot of, I think, intel on funnel reports that, again, are important. But again, it's not the leading indicator because I've had recruiters say to me, wow, the market's great. And there's all these candidates and I'm talking to everyone. But then I see that none of their candidates or a very high percentage are not making it through. There's something wrong with the process or missing the mark.
This is actually where I see a great use case for AI. You've talked about the art and science of hiring, and that's something that we talk a lot about in the industry. The science of hiring right now with AI can actually be applied at the top of the funnel in those areas that you called out, where it's what is the context around somebody's specific experience at a company.
Yep.
I think that's the skill of a recruiter is being able to map the market, map the experience that can help empower those yield ratios so that those recruiters are spending more time with the right
With the right
candidates.
candidates.
How do you think recruiters can own knowledge of their funnel in better ways?
Well, I mean, I think that point that you just made alone is let's eliminate some of the noise up front, right? And what AI can do, and again, it's our partner in this journey, it can aggregate data for you, really lean in on what is actually important. And then, like you said, give more time to the recruiter to be that consultative partner. How do we make sure that this is something that makes sense to submit to this particular manager because they understand more about the business?
When I think about the data and impact recruiters make, quality of hire is the holy grail. How do we influence post hire outcomes through the work we do as recruiters? There's a lot of tasks in a recruiter day. And now we're faced with the reality of fraudulent candidates, a higher volume of unqualified candidates at the top of the funnel. We're asking recruiters to verify a candidate's potential identity in those conversations. How do you think recruiters can balance so much on their plate while also influencing a strong post hire outcome?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is recruiters today have it so much better than I did when I started, right? The full life cycle recruiting standpoint, you are the sourcer, you are the conduit, right, between the hiring manager, you're the expert on screening. You take it to the next level of negotiations. There's so much less now. And with AI, that is a powerful combination. I think that there are still best practices when having the full lexical funnel work. So hopefully with the tools today that recruiters can do a better job and give them more time back into having those consultative conversations.
Tell me more about the differences of recruiting when you started out versus today, perhaps around tooling. How do you think it's evolved?
It has evolved tenfold. I mean, think about it. I'm not here to date myself, but pre-internet, let's be honest. But at the same time, recruiters that have these tools and the innovation that has come along with actually how you source a candidate, the keyword search, all of these, and the tools that are now embedded in these ATS tools is unbelievable. One of the statistics that I used to, or the stats that I used to look at for my recruiters is how many LinkedIn outbound in-mails they were sending to candidates. But it wasn't just the number, I was actually looking at what was the content of the email that they were sending. And so you would look at the conversion of how many of those outbound emails were actually getting a response. Now they have AI built into the seat where you can actually say, this is what I want to say to a candidate. Can we make it better or more interesting? So when I think about that, I'm blown away at how much time that you could actually spend in finding the perfect candidate for a role versus just hoping that they're gonna answer me. So, I mean, that's just one snippet of it. But when I think about all that we had to do as far as even negotiations and how important salary and understanding what is the market value, it's so much easier now to have that conversation. I mean, I'm having to talk about, you know, equity plans and how to take someone back from the job that they're making so much money versus, but here I'm selling the employer brand. This is why you want to come join. So I think the art of recruiting has gotten a little bit easier.
When it comes to the balancing the art and science, where does human judgment matter the most?
Well, when you think about the art, as you're gleaning information on a candidate, it's not just, again, what are your particular skills, but what are you going to bring to the table and what have your experiences been? So I'm hoping that a recruiter will understand what is the role that I'm trying to fill, but what is the potential of the candidate. And I don't think that just by understanding those keywords, we're going to be able to take it to the next level. So human judgment has to be a part of this.
So we've talked about the art and science of recruiting. What are some of those metrics that tell you that hiring is working?
If you look at the business outcomes, they really want to understand quality. And I think that's a very difficult measure at times, right, to figure out because, again, that could mean when is someone actually driving revenue for a role? So there's the ramp up time. I think that's difficult. But once you start to understand it takes six months for a role to actually ramp up, that is a key indicator. I think that there are a lot of other scores that are important, like NPS, right? The quality of hire with managers really want to understand, and also getting feedback from candidates, hopefully that have gotten hired, but ones that didn't. I think there's just that understanding of recruiters and how they're actually portraying the company. I think that first year turnover is a good indicator of a few things. It's not necessarily recruiter activity. It just means there could be some friction or some possibilities of positive news that why it's working. The stuff that I think are anecdotal are going to be, again, volume, the funnel. How do we actually move through the process? Can we remove some of those barriers? And I've had many of those moments of, is this necessary? Is it actually hitting risk? Do we need to have it? Or is it just an extra step? So I do think that you can look at data across the board, but you would have to decide. And I think those are the top three between quality of hire, with the ramp up time, and the success of someone being revenue generating in a role. And I think that there's some anecdotal information that hiring managers would want to know, but I don't know that it's a true indicator of success.
You mentioned something that's critically important, and it's the NPS.
Mm.
Recruiters are rejecting more applicants than ever per requisition.
Mm.
How do you think they can consider balancing the employer brand with that negative news?
It's a great question because I have found that NPS scores have really helped my recruiters have an indicator of what's working. And even if they are not the right candidate that we select, their experience plays a huge role in that. And that impacts brand, right? Good or bad. And one thing that they could be doing is maybe those NPS scores could actually be going out to folks even that don't make it to the recruiter screen. So it's an interesting question of whether or not they would get a different response because of course they've been rejected. So maybe there's needs to be a different level in there provided, but I think it would be interesting to see what the feedback is because it's I believe a lot of applicants today are very frustrated with how quickly they are getting rejected without any context. But it's like if they actually did get a rejection, at least they got something.
What are some of the issues that are keeping recruiters up at night?
I think if we go back to it's the speed, I know that they're under a lot of pressure, right? They're being asked to do way more with less, but I'm starting to see indicators that the market is realizing that there is serious burnout happening. I think that most recruiters, as working with people, want to have more time to have those conversations. But my concern is that it is training recruiters at any stage in their career that speed is the only answer and they're not learning the skills, right? It's actually not doing them any favors for what it's going to mean in their career down the road. How do we actually glean information? These are human beings that we're talking about. And I don't know that there are some gaps, it seems like, between supervisors and recruiters really having the time to understand what they're going through when it comes to actually the amount of candidates they're getting.
When I think about making a hire, we typically have three variables: time, quality, and cost. Cost is largely out of a recruiter's control. How can recruiters balance speed and quality?
Well, I think it goes back to I was giving you the example of when I've seen ramp ups, right? If you're going from, one hire to 100 in a very short amount of time, there's clearly pressure to go fast. And I think that you have to slow down in order to go fast. And I think that part of that will show up in having clear stakeholders. What is the cadence? What is the actual role that we're working on and the skills? Having touch points along the way as opposed to just where I think recruiters have been very programmatic. They're just submitting applications and it's not taking them any further. And I think that's where the leadership within TA has to be doing that training and working with them and to set those expectations between recruiters and the business.
When you're hiring a specific role and going from one hire to 100, what often breaks first?
Well, I would have to say the quality because again, if you're getting that pressure, right, it's easy to go fast and just try to jump into high gear. If you don't stop and understand all the parameters, there's cost involved, there is timelines involved, and we know that scope can change. But if you don't have the foundation prior, there really can lead to chaos, and I've seen that happen. So I have a great example of a time where my team was under pressure to hire 120 people within 4 months, and it was during the holiday season. And I'm thinking there has to be a way that we can set some ground rules because a lot of pressure, a lot of seniority was looking at this, and we were excited about it. But at the same time, I knew that we were going to strap some other recruiters. I needed to look at capacity. I needed to be clear with the business. And I also found ways that we could actually minimize the process and the friction by do we need to go through the exact same flow we would for others because of the time frame that we were in. I think by having a kickoff call, of course, that would be first state of mind. But the things that we worked out were just how long do we have? Where is the revenue going to be at risk if we don't hit certain milestones? And the clarity of our touch points. We also needed to understand our source. By the way, it was also for a client that we could not actually go out to market yet because the incumbent was still in the role. So we had to look at mobility options, other sourcing, and we were starting this from scratch. So to me, the success of that client win only came because I looked at different sources and slowing the process down before we jumped through hoops.
Understanding source of hire attribution is critical for how we allocate recruiter time, recruiter capacity planning. How do you balance inbound applicants versus outbound sourcing?
Well, I think that it just depends at the time of the market because there have been many times where inbound traffic, I believe that today you're getting a lot of great candidates. Just you've got to weed through the noise. I've also been, certainly not only as a recruiter myself, but also teams where you're posting a job and nothing's coming through. So we know that the outbound process for a recruiter is so critical to finding those folks, right? And there's different ways to look at that. If I'm going by company and where I can find people, they're working. And then there's a lot of passive candidates that we're just not sure about. So if those talent pools aren't being nurtured over time, there always has to be that balance.
When we think about getting the right signal from a specific candidate's experience, oftentimes in an employer's market, we add additional steps to the hiring process.
Yes.
So no longer is it a 3-round interview, it's a 4, maybe 5-round interview. How do you think recruiters can create great candidate experiences when the process extends?
Number one is communication. It's the same when I think about managers, hiring managers that are maybe frustrated because they haven't heard anything from their recruiter. But the candidate, I think, appreciates, myself included, if there is just communication and I know where we stand, there may not be an answer, and that is okay. It's the gap in time that I think frustrates candidates.
The evolution of the talent function is moving very fast. If you were building a talent function from scratch today, what would you do differently from maybe just a few years ago?
When I've come into roles, I've either inherited a team the recruiting function's already there. So if I had to do it from scratch, I would start with operations first and understand the systems and understand what the business plan is. Then I would be able to build a team. I just don't know if where that would ever be able to take place.
How do you think about setting up a strong system of record, your applicant tracking system, your source of truth, so that the team is set up to scale?
Well, I've had the privilege of working in many different ATSs, but when I think about what we're trying to accomplish, it needs to be thought through from the recruiter's lens. And I do think that there are a lot of tools out there that are just extensions. That's not their first point of business. So for me, it's how can I remove friction for the recruiter in their day to day? Because I've been a recruiter, I understand. And I want them to focus on what is important to be putting into the system versus the amount of clicks or how we have to go through the process, because it's extremely frustrating when you're juggling that many candidates.
What are some of those friction points that can be eliminated by an applicant tracking system so that a recruiter can do what they do best?
Well, I think that what I'm hearing now is just the ability for ease of candidates showing up right against their requisitions and moving them through the process without having to go through great lengths. It should be able to now have this one source of truth that can move in different directions easily. How do we make sure that shared communication, so if a recruiter is covering for someone or we're moving candidates, that you can actually see clearly what has actually transpired? No one wants to go back to the candidate and say, I don't remember the conversation. Where were you in the process? So again, these all are touch points, and also ease of extracting information from their resume to move forward to the next process down to the offer letter.
What do you think the value of a strong recruiting coordinator is?
Well, I think that they are at times the first person that might be in part of the process with the candidate, and they're representing the company. And I would want them to have urgency with candidates as they move through the process. So just timely feedback, updates, and working with them on whether that's scheduling or the next steps. And I think that having that connection with the candidate truly does help them along the process and a reflection of the company.
Historically, the career path is recruiting coordinator to recruiting leader. Now we're seeing the emergence of a parallel career path in recruiting operations, and we're seeing more rec ops leaders. What do you see as the future of these rec ops professionals?
I think it's so important because it could actually be, again, the epicenter for what recruiters need from a tools perspective, but also even sourcing strategies and what has worked. So that's why when you asked me the question earlier about how I would start a new company, it would start with operations first. Because again, I've been in roles where data analytics and that function lives in a couple of different departments. That doesn't bother me, but it just makes sense that there is a connection between employer brand, social media. What are we actually tracking? I think that it is, again, the nerve center, if you will, for recruitment and best practices.
What do you think the recruiting industry is getting wrong right now?
Well, I think a lot of things are feeding into this, but I would say that candidate experience is starting to go in the wrong direction. And I just know that when I was with former companies, the candidate experience, that wow experience was so important. And it took us a long time to get to that point. And so for me, I'm noticing that how candidates are being treated today, I know are going to remember this moving forward. So I do think there needs to be an evolution of how do we make sure that we're being taken care of, whether that's a no.
Recruiters are under so much pressure. How can we ensure the teams we're leading are indexing on the value of candidate experience?
Well, I think that starts with where does it fit in the company model? And I think that from a leadership perspective and even just people and culture teams today, it has to be a priority. I mean, it's just like where we felt like people and culture teams didn't have a seat at the table. And we spent a lot of time fighting for not being considered just a cost center, but actually a strategic lever in the business. So I think the candidate experience needs to be a common thread. And again, I know that remote still exists, but now companies are really pushing for people to come back. And that experience is going to be so important. That candidate experience needs to be covered throughout the whole journey.
What do you think great talent acquisition teams are doing correctly today?
I think that great teams have an understanding of what true recruitment capacity looks like, the balance, because they're giving them enough space to actually breathe. I think the other piece to that is, again, candidate experience is a common thread that not only lives within recruitment, but funnels throughout the people and culture and the business. Because again, we're also part of the attraction, but we're also hopefully part of the retention.
What excites you about using AI in the hiring process?
For me, it's just the ability for a recruiter to, again, spend more time with the business and take out the administration piece. And that could look like a few different things, right? I think there's a lot of technical aptitude that we can actually do through AI. I think, again, job descriptions. I think there are even prompts that can help us and do a better job of sourcing. There's so many things that administratively I think recruiters actually need to tend to. To me, that's where the magic's going to happen, is partnership and giving recruiters more time.
When we think about balancing speed with quality and upskilling and uplifting the industry, what do you think the value of the recruiting community is?
How powerful it is to stay connected with some of the people that you've been able to coach over the years, bring new ideas to the table and just uplift each other and actually learn through their own experiences what's to come. And I think that having that ability, whether that's for females or any networking from a TA perspective, it just helps build a community around how important I think talent acquisition is within each company.
When this is all said and done, why will recruiting have been enough for you?
Well, when I think back of actually entering in this field and not fully understanding what it was, in the end, for me, it's just been able to connect with people and actually bring companies and help them actually find jobs has been extremely rewarding.
Here's a look at the next episode of the Recruiting Roadshow, brought to you by Greenhouse.
The next guest on the show is Andrew Delaware. Andrew is a talent operations expert, and in this conversation, we talk a little bit about his unique take on data and how the right metrics allow recruiters to become strategic talent advisors.
Data is not the answer. It's never the answer. Data should force you to ask questions. Data is the byproduct of the good work already being done.
When I think about the vastness of recruiting and hiring in general, there's no one-size-fits-all way to do it.
The future, I think, is more of an advisory seat. You really need to make the hiring system legible for everyone.
The average IC recruiter is not responsible for cost or quantity around hires. So the only two variables they have to work with are quality and time.
The recruiters now who want to be talent advisors don't want to just be role fillers. They want to be someone who's trusted. They want to be seen as the expert in the room, and they're acting like it.